Hello and welcome to It's a Band Thing, the official podcast of the Association of Concert Bands. This next episode was recorded just before I flew to the US back in December for Midwest Clinic, and I was using some of my new portable equipment for that. First time that I use it, and as a result, I lost the very end of this conversation, but it's an amazing interview. We had two amazing guests, Alex Shapiro and Kaitlin Bove, talking about the importance of commissioning and the importance of the work that they both do in flex band music and in commissioning new composers too. So please enjoy the podcast. You will hear that it's sort of an abrupt ending, but I will chime back in towards the end to let you know that it's going to be finishing up. And Happy New Year. We're looking forward to some great guests and some great interviews throughout the year. So join us and make sure you subscribe.
Well, welcome to It's a Band Thing. The Association of Concert Bands has started a podcast, and this is the third podcast in our line of podcasts, and we're very excited about this and to know who our new people are that we're going to have on today. We have Kaitlin Bove and Alex Shapiro, both wonderful musicians as well as composers and conductors, and we're so thrilled to have them here. One of the things that ACB is in my presidency that I've been really working on are two major things. One of them is diversity and how we can make this organization more diverse. And part of the reason we're bringing in these great guests tonight is for that, as well as international. And I feel we wear the title of we are the international voice of community bands. And so we also have as the co-host of this Keith Kelly, and he's in the Dublin area, and he is in Galway. I guess I should have said that, shouldn't I? And so we have our international and our diversity, and so we're trying very hard to bring this to our audience as well as to our membership to let them know that there is just a fantastic, beautiful, colorful world out there that we want to be part of and to serve as a service of ACB. So I would like to, if possible, ladies, if I could just first of all say hello to you, and then what I'd like you to do is just tell us a little bit about what you do, where you live, your little bit of your background, and we can interject. Keith and I can interject a little bit in some questions that pop out and things like that, just to keep the podcast going. So I'm going to start with Kaitlin. And Kaitlin, I'm going to ask you, first of all, hello, welcome. I hope you're ready to get your holidays going. How are you tonight?
Great. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So tell us a little bit about you, maybe a little bit about your background, maybe where you live, and how you've gotten involved with the music world in education as well as some of your composing and conducting.
Thanks. So I grew up in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area and started my music career very traditionally in fourth grade band, picking up the flute because that's what my parents handed to me. And by sixth grade, I had decided, wow, I love band and being in this music education environment so much that I never want to leave. And the only way to do that is just to become that guy up on the podium, the teacher.
Right.
So I knew by middle school I wanted to do that, and prepped, through high school, giving lessons and conducting our pep band and being in as many musical events as I could. I majored in music education at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. Following that, I taught for several years middle school level band and orchestra, did a master's back at Pacific, eventually took over a high school program where I did work with all elements, including teaching the guitar class, music appreciation, marching band, music theory. And eventually I decided that the path that I was on was going to continue to concentrate and focus on a lot of competition and perfectionism in order to gain, I guess, the visibility and the platform that I was looking for my students to be able to feel successful. And I just didn't feel good about that. And so I chose to go into higher ed and to do a doctorate, which I completed at University of Kentucky in 2019, so that I could be in a position to work with more pre-professional musicians, especially future music educators and ensemble directors, to try and support their philosophy of music making and turn it more into about the art, the artistry, the emotional connection between ensemble members and audiences, and about creating like really cool, unique individual projects through music that aren't so focused on winning trophies or being perfect, but more about
Excellent.
seeing like how is music art and how are we reaching our audiences, and especially in the 21st century where we continue to have this bigger divide between the general public and what is considered classical music, band being somewhat part of that, and to try and make up for some of those gaps. So I currently teach now at Pierce College in Puyallup, Washington. It's a community college, so I have a combination of college age students, even high school students, and a lot of adult community members in our ensembles. And so working with those various populations and the audiences they bring in has been really rewarding.
That's really great. Just give me a real quick on your doctorate that you got. What did you focus on in your study as you got to the end of it? Like, did you have a certain thing that you were studying?
Yeah. So when I attended my doctorate at University of Kentucky, my mentor was Cody Birdwell. He's a director of bands there, and my emphasis was in wind band conducting. That's what my
Oh,
doctorate's in. But I really did focus and concentrate a lot on diverse repertoire. And my dissertation project was actually a transcription where I took Caroline Shaw's Partita for 8 Voices, which was the Pulitzer Prize winner in 2013, and transcribed it for a wind band setting and some spoken word voices. And the part of that project was to bring a living female composer's voice into the band medium who didn't currently exist there, since Caroline has to date not written a piece for band yet.
right. Okay.
But also the process of taking something that had a really complex, interesting, unique, beautiful vocal techniques and figuring out how to make those same sounds on instruments. So that was like a
Oh,
really fun
I
kind of
bet.
puzzle to solve as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
how exciting. Well, thank you. And we'll get back to more of that with you because I'm interested to find out more about that. But we also have this fantastic composer, Alex Shapiro, with us as well. And Alex and I have just barely started to get to know one another. I've heard about your music for 2 or 3 years, but last year, this past summer, we had the opportunity to meet at the Kappa Kappa Psi. I think, is that a national convention or was that international? I don't know.
National.
National.
Wait,
But
NIB, National, yeah,
yeah,
Intercollegiate.
right, an intercollegiate,
Yeah.
and it was very close to my home. I live in Michigan, and it was 20 minutes away. And so I, as the president, I was thrilled to go, and I didn't even know Alex was going to be there. And we had the opportunity because she had this beautiful commissioned work that the organization that had their honors band was playing. So by chance, we happened to sort of meet, and what a thrill it was for me, Alex. So please welcome Alex. We're glad you're here, and also share a little bit about your background, would you please?
Thanks. And yeah, it was a real nice surprise to get to meet you.
Yeah,
I was so
wonderful.
glad you came up and said hi in
Yeah.
July. That was wonderful. That was my second symphony for winds and percussion called Suspended, a four movement work. And it was
Beautiful.
so much fun to do with Cynthia Johnston
Right.
Turner conducting. Let's see. Okay, well, let's start off with, like Kaitlin, years ago, I picked up the flute too, but unlike Kaitlin, I put it right back down because I have zero talent with wind instruments. I don't know if it's because I have like flute has, of course, no resistance, right? Of all the instruments, you have to have really good breath control. And I have low blood pressure. I think I would just start to pass out and see stars, It was not for me, but I play this beast of an instrument behind me, the piano. And also, I just want to point out that I listened very recently, a day or two ago, to the most wonderful conversation between Keith and Kaitlin on his podcast that I want to recommend to anybody listening to this. Jump over, and he'll put the link, in the accompanying materials here. Jump over and listen to what they had to say because it was a great, riveting, wonderful conversation.
Right.
So
And Global Band Room, probably. Yep.
Global Band Room, right. And Kaitlin just has so many great things to say, and it was a wonderful conversation between both of you. So
it's always easy when you pick good guests, Alex.
True.
Well, we're in for a disappointment here with me jamming into the room now. Darn. But anyway, so my background is, as you can see, well, those of you listening don't see, but I'm in a very nice studio, a project studio here in my home. I live on beautiful San Juan Island, Washington, which is just off the coast of British Columbia. We're actually much closer to BC than we are to America, but we are an American archipelago. And we have no bridge, so it means flapping your wings really hard or swimming in very cold water to get over to the mainland. But we do have, grocery stores, bookstores. We have more bookstores than grocery stores. I think that's always a good indication. I've lived up here 15 years. And working backwards, I lived for 24 years in Southern California, and the first 15 of those I was in the commercial music world, doing mostly low budget film and TV projects, and doing that for a long time,
Oh, okay.
and some engineering. And then after about 15 years of that, I decided, I want to go back to my roots. I really want to write chamber music. At the time, it was just chamber music, not large ensemble stuff. And so I did for about a decade just chamber music, literally only chamber music. I wasn't even seeking the large ensembles because I was in a fun niche. I love writing for the intimacy of small groups. And it was a way back then, and this was sort of the beginnings of the internet and everything else. We're talking about the late 90s.
Okay.
It was a way to reach small ensembles around the world and get performances and get myself known on the concert music side, because as we know, regrettably, there is not a lot of connection and cross-pollination between the commercial music side and the concert music side. That might be a little bit less now because, again, of technology and the internet connecting us all. But back then, it was very much, very separate worlds. And before that, I was born and raised on an island half the size of the one I live on now, actually. It's called Manhattan in New York City. It is physically, I am not kidding you, it is half the size. It's like 23 square miles as opposed to this one's 55 square miles. Just a slight population difference.
Oh, yeah.
No whales and octopuses as far as I know. But I grew up there and right in Manhattan. And that was awesome because I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And that was a very interesting time to be in New York, especially in the 70s when I was coming of age as a teenager, because New York City was everything. You had punk rock and disco when worlds collide, right? You had all the major music houses and art and dance and drama and musical theater and everything smooshed into one tiny island.
Wow.
And I was really lucky that I'm the only child of two parents who were very happy to have me have the run of the city from the time I was 13 on. I'm not sure if they cared if I came back or not.
Oh.
So this worked to my advantage because
they must have trusted you.
I used to save up my babysitting money and go to everything because back then you could get into the Village Vanguard and hear the Brecker Brothers or Elvin Jones or whomever for $5, as I recall, and a beer. I mean, it was affordable even back then. I was making $1.25 an hour as a babysitter when I was 14. So it was great. And standing room only at the Metropolitan Opera was $3.
Oh,
and I loved opera. I loved everything, and I still do. I love every kind of music. And I would always dress really nicely when I went to the Met because invariably I was always by myself because how many other 15-year-olds really want to go to the opera?
Right,
especially
exactly.
Contemporary operas, And no, it never failed. I always could scout out the one lone orchestra seat, and nab it at the second act, right? So I'd go from standing and leaning on the velvet bar to zoom, great seat.
Exactly.
So I saw everything at New York City Opera and Met. But that was my upbringing. I was really lucky, and so that's like the reverse order of my life. I started writing when I was about 9, really badly, very bad.
But age of 9.
No Mozart, but I loved doing it, and so I kept doing it. Nobody told me not to do it.
Sure.
That's my life.
Did you have parents that influenced you, expected you to or wanted you to take piano? Did they play?
Fortunately, I think they did want me to, but they were really smart. They actually started me on piano lessons when I was 6. And by age 6.5, they noticed that they were throwing a lot of money at piano lessons and their little girl, Alexandra, was not practicing. And they were very smart. They said, listen, if you're not going to practice, we're not going to pay for lessons. And I said, okay. So out went the lessons. But then this is a great punchline and actually something for anybody out there who's a parent. This is really important. So they were very cool about not forcing me to do something I was not applying myself to. But 3 years later, when I started writing music, and I had learned just enough in those 6 months of piano lessons to write notes mostly facing the right direction, not entirely, I'm sure, but I could notate a little bit. And by the time I was 10, actually, I asked them, could I have piano lessons?
There we
And they
go.
look at me and say, are you going to practice? And I said,
Yeah.
yes, 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 I'm going to practice.
Oh.
Because at that point, I had matured to a
Sure.
fine 10-year-old. And, and I'm like busy writing. And I
Sure.
realized, I was smart enough to realize, gee, it would be awfully nice to have the tool of
Right.
88 keys in front of me to figure
Sure.
out harmony, counterpoint, and all of this. And so they gave me piano lessons, and I actually ended up studying. I never wanted to be a concert pianist or a performing pianist, but I was playing concerti and everything else. I mean, I was very,
Wow.
I got to be pretty accomplished. I studied until I was 18 privately with this
did you?
wonderful recitalist
Wow.
in New York. So I used it as a composition tool, and of course learning and loving the repertoire, which I still play. It's still on my piano desk, behind me. A lot of the stuff I was playing as a teenager.
That's
I love to
fantastic.
play. But my teacher, it was he was more interested in the piano lessons than my budding
Yes,
composing career.
composition. Yes.
And like so many composers will tell you this, that they're playing their instrument and they start to improvise and riff plan, so I'm totally butchering Beethoven, and I got to something, and I go off, I take it out on the freeway, with all kinds of improvisation. And my piano teacher, very wonderful man, but a bit humorless, I guess, and he looked at me when I was done with this little adventure, and he said, Alexandra, really, I think Ludwig did it better the first time.
Oh, how clever.
So, of course, he was right that Ludwig did do what he did better. But that is how a lot of composers, I think, start, is we just start riffing,
Sure. Sure. And
So
and feeling the freedom to be able to express yourself, that in itself, even at that time, was pretty incredible. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool.
So, one of the things that we wanted to talk about tonight, because we have two people that are very, very active within this, it's hardly a new movement. And actually, I spoke to someone recently about this when we were talking about flex band, and it was like, oh, there's been community bands playing flex band music since there's been community bands. We've all had the experience of picking out instrumentalists to play different lines because that's who we have at any one time. I think it was Beth Steele that mentioned that with our own small band,
Right.
but flex band has become something of an important topic over the course of the last 18 months because of the pandemic. And what I've been particularly excited about here in Ireland, and I'm sure lots of community bands are excited about, is that we have all of these magnificent composers. Two of them are with us tonight, but that are adapting their work, but also writing new works and encouraging other composers to write new works with flexibility in mind from the get-go. And I wanted to talk about that tonight with that community band perspective on it, because community bands sometimes get left behind in terms of the original destination for the music. We're playing music that was originally written for middle school or high school or college bands a lot of the time, and community bands are the ones that are purchasing and playing that music, but it was never really written for us in the first place. Whereas flex music, I think, that has the potential to be really key to our repertoire moving forward. Let's start with you, Kaitlin. We spoke briefly on the Global Bandroom podcast about this, and you were advocating and taking part in and arranging flex music before the pandemic. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I had actually planned on a new ensemble at my school that was essentially going to be a flex group. Planned on starting them in fall 2020, but inevitably had to start them early when the pandemic happened, about 2 quarters prior to that for us. So just started getting our feet wet a little faster than planned, but it was always my intention to be working in a flex capacity with that group.
And tell me, for anyone that is listening to this, we have a lot of listeners to the podcast that are directors and educators, but we also have a lot of people involved in the Association of Concert Bands that are performers with their band, and they may not understand the difference between flex band music and regular arrangements, where their conductor is telling them to transpose the flute part onto clarinet and play that. Tell me, what is the purpose of flex band music in your mind?
Well, to me, it becomes more about engaging the performers on kind of the base level, in terms of playing with a lot more soloistic qualities, or just working with other people across the ensemble that you normally might not work with. So maybe you're in a group that has a pretty set, solid instrumentation already, but flex music would allow you to mix up the players in a way that they normally wouldn't. So for instance, with a traditional piece, all the flutes, all 400 flutes in a concert band, let's be honest, would be playing flute parts, and you're constantly just trying to tamp them down. And please stop playing so loud, flutes, calm down. At least that's usually my problem. I've had a group with like 17 flute players in it before. It's unreasonable. But flex music gives you the opportunity to redistribute balances, to redistribute color, and to really come up with a unique setting of a piece of music that only your group gets to do, and making decisions based on each individual player's characteristics, personalities, ability levels, versus just kind of cracking open a piece of traditional music and just passing out, you get what you get. So I really love that, because that just, the idea of flex band, I think people have this bad taste in their mouth of, oh, that music's only designed for groups without good quality instrumentation because we decided what that was 100 years ago. But to me, it's all about just breaking down those structures, because I really do just love blowing up pretty much every kind of construct I can get my hands on, and decide, and letting the group decide, well, what is this piece going to be for us, and who else is playing your part with you. And you have to listen to that saxophone player and that euphonium player and that clarinet player, and actually blend with them on your part, instead of just hiding in the flute section. So that's been awesome. It's also been awesome to allow, I have a cellist in our little flex ensemble group, and we have very few string players in that group. It's mostly wind and percussion. And the cellist, she's gotten like a million times better since starting in our flex group. And she says to me, like, every couple of weeks, completely unprovoked, how she's so happy to have had that opportunity to help her with her skills as working as a solo player, playing out, balancing to new instruments that she never had to before, being the only person on her part sometimes, whereas prior to that, she had only ever just been middle of the section cellist in all of her previous experiences. So I feel really confident about sending her out in the world, being a more independent, confident musician because of the opportunities she's learned in our flex situation.
And Alex, is there a sense of loss of control from a composer when they're putting together a flex band piece? We've probably all heard this idea that the music is perfect on the score, and then it can only be imperfect once performed. And I think all of us here probably disagree with that sentiment. I certainly believe music is not music is not music until it's performed. In fact, but composers do like to control the sound that the ensembles produce, some more so than others in terms of direction that they give in their score. Letting the conductor and the musicians choose the instrumentation and the balance of that instrumentation, you have to have confidence in your score, and you have to have confidence in your performers to allow that to happen. How do you approach something like that, Alex?
Oh, you anticipate it and you write for it. And of course, I can, of course, make the joke that if you're looking for control, get out of the wind band world. If you're a composer, it's, adventures in microtonality. Come on, folks. But no, and I, on the other end of this spectrum, it is true, however, that composers are the ultimate control freaks, right? Because we decide where every black dot and every phrasing and every articulation is going to be. But in all seriousness, the great thing for composers about writing with the intent to make something flexible, adaptable, whatever you want to call it, is that you are anticipating the fact that there will be, every variation of this imaginable and then some. And so you're not necessarily writing specifically for color. This is why a lot of, let's say, grade 5, grade 6, professional level challenging pieces don't translate particularly well, in my humble opinion. Most of them don't translate well to flex, because when you're writing at that level, I guarantee you're thinking quite specifically about color. It is not substitutable. It's not that it won't sound okay, but it won't be your intent of what it sounded like when the piccolo in its lowest range with the French horn and then throw in a tenor sax and whatever, you get that certain sound. If that goes out the window, the intent of the composition at that level goes out the window. So more advanced pieces tend not to work so well for adaptation, but other things work beautifully. And in my case, when I started doing this at the pretty much the start of the pandemic, when I started doing it, I actually looked into my catalog to see what could I adapt, and I had plenty of pieces that would have been contenders at the high school level. But my brain doesn't function very well in reverse. I guess it doesn't. It didn't. I couldn't reimagine these pieces, and then I realized, well, in my case, because they're electroacoustic, frankly, as I like to say, 4 ferrets playing kazoos could come in and play Tight Squeeze or, any of these pieces, and it would sound awesome, right? Because the track picks up the slack in general. So I left those alone. And instead, what I did, and I had so much fun, I'm writing another one right now. I had so much fun doing this. I created 3 or 4 from scratch flex pieces, all of which in very different ways, trying different methods of doing it with very different setups. And I loved doing it. And so to your point, Keith, about, what about that control and are you going to be wildly disappointed if you are writing for ranges basically of instruments, and if you're writing in a certain contrapuntal way where whatever ranges or whoever is playing, it's still going to sound really cool because of other elements you're putting into the music and other ways you're treating it, it's going to be just fine. It's going to be great. So it's a matter of the composer changing their mindset to some degree and going in with the intent. It reminds me of back in the 70s, which, very few people remember the 70s. But
Oh, no, I do.
When the hippies came in and decided that forget about chocolate ice cream, we're going to have carob ice cream. And the big mistake they made with carob is that they told us all that it tastes like chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do? We get a mouthful of kind of mealy, nutty carob, and we were so disappointed. At least some of us were. Had they just said, it's carob ice cream, try it. It's awesome. It's kind of nutty. It's kind of different. We would have all liked carob a lot more. Mm-hmm. It's about the intent and the expectation. If a composer goes in thinking, oh, this is going to sound like Mahler, you're going to be sadly disappointed because the colors and, it's not going to be Takamitsu. It's not going to be all these amazing colors. It's going to be something different and beautiful and wonderful. Mm-hmm. So you have to go in saying, it's carob and it's really good.
Right.
That's why when I'm selling Ireland, I always show them pictures of grey skies and rain. And so if they arrive and it's a nice blue sky, it's a bonus.
Wow.
That's right. Undersell, over deliver.
Exactly. Gail, your band, you're blessed with a full instrumentation in the West Michigan Concert Winds. We come from very different ends of the community band spectrum, in some respects.
Yeah.
Have you had the opportunity to use flex band music? I know I certainly have used the old flex band music that Hal Leonard would have been producing prior to the pandemic, and it was always very useful. But just to Alex's point, I always kind of felt like, I'm not playing the real part here, so I always felt like I was kind of playing the second rate part of this, and I think that's what's really changed in the last 18 months more so than previous. Have you used these parts?
I did some of the what you said, the older ones, the pre-pandemic ones, and I always felt like they were scored very thinly. And so I never sound, even with a fairly good size ensemble that has, 4 tubas and this and this and this, I never felt like it was giving me all of the beauty and all the colors and all that. However, just listening even today, talking about it, because of the way the pandemic is right now, I have to rehearse almost an 80-piece band in 2 separate bands every time with less rehearsal time, and then try to put them together for a concert. It's very much like middle school band with adults. But I was thinking it would be really cool to have that group of people who are my finest players as doing what they're doing, but then allow for what we could call, my nickname of my band is called the Winds Flex Group. And that would be where, and I really enjoyed, Kaitlin, what you were saying, to help some of these third chair or third clarinet players that are in the 10th or 12th chair to get a chance to do that. It has sort of happened because I've had to divide my bands up. there's people who are having to play, and I'm hearing second and third parts that maybe you wouldn't normally hear all the time. And I think that has something to do with it. But to answer your question, Keith, the thing I like is that for those of us that do this, when I heard about the consortium that Alex, we had you on ACB and ACB Connects, I believe, early on, like way back in maybe April last year. And you got talking about this whole flex thing. And the more I listened to, the more I got involved with it, I thought exactly that. The carob tastes fabulous because this is exactly what community bands need, is a band in the middle of North Dakota who wants to start, and they have 7 people. They can actually play some really lovely things that an adult can appreciate. That before, I can remember when I first got involved with community bands, there wasn't even an adult way to teach. Like New Horizons hadn't really started, and so there was no way to teach an adult unless you were using the first division band method that played all baby songs. So it has come a long way. And so to answer your question in a very long way around, Keith, I think this is, for being the president of an organization like this, I think this is fabulous because it is only going to explode and allow for more community bands being able to play very good literature.
That's right.
I've mentioned on a number of podcasts now that flex band music is very exciting to us here in Ireland, and I'm sure in many other parts of the world as well, where full instrumentation is just never possible. I can pick 1 or 2 bands in the country that will have full instrumentation and will struggle at it for most performances, honestly. I had a band reach out to me just prior to the pandemic from Donegal, which is a remote part of Ireland, and doesn't have much infrastructure. And the band had dwindled down to about 12 people. And they reached out to me for advice on getting new music because the director at the time had said, well, we're going to have to fold the band because music doesn't exist for our lineup. And this is exactly this. This can be the saving of many community bands around the world, honestly, if it can be embraced. And if it can be embraced with music that's written for this purpose rather than just sort of arranged after the fact, then that gives us a sense of purpose and a sense of maturity and a sense of artistic vision for our 12 people, whatever those numbers are. When we talk about that international side of ACB, Gail, I think this flex band music is actually
Right.
can play a big
Absolutely.
role in that. Kaitlin, have you had an opportunity to use some of this in your settings? Have you come up with creative ways to kind of use the instrumentation? I can think of really cool ways to kind of have the euphonium player play melodies that they wouldn't have played before. I'm sure the musicians find it exciting.
Yeah, one thing I just also did recently is I commissioned a work for Flex Music for Flex Band that we got this fall, which we didn't technically need because we're back to full instrumentation. But like I said, I just enjoy the philosophy of it. And I also wanted to help bring this piece to our various communities so that other people, including my other 40 consortium members, could get some use out of. So I asked for from a composer, and it was her first time writing for Flex, and so I mean she just delivered like incredibly. But Allison Loggins Hall wrote a piece called "The Loop," which is based on the L train loop in Chicago, the elevated train kind of chugging along through there. It's for 5-part Flex, open instrumentation, percussion, and an electronic track. So similar to what Alex does. The electronic track ends up being a bit of a house beat, which also comes from Chicago. So there's definitely this like house hip hop element that we're bringing into the band world that we're sorely lacking, I think, in my opinion. And then the last request I had of it was for each of the 5 lines to be delivered in 2 difficulty levels.
Oh.
So an advanced part and a simplified part, which means as I passed out the parts, I could not only pick which instruments we're going to play parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then on an individual level of what performer would have had more success on the A difficulty or B difficulty. And so just that amount of control there too is giving it just every aspect and every potential to be successful. And to be honest, like even with some of the parts being more of at a grade 5 difficulty level, we sight read it practically perfectly just because it was so contoured and tailored to each individual musician. And so we're going to be performing that this Saturday, and also including a cool visual element, which we can kind of add because we already have electronics in the work. So we've got a tape of the L train playing on the walls surrounding the audience. It's going to be really, really cool. But yeah, I've just been really, my original request has just, I think enveloped into just so much more potentials just once we finally got the music, just helping to create new ideas. And so
Sure.
I'm just really excited about tons of potential still happening.
Kaitlin.
And then I will mention too, oh, sorry.
No, keep going. Keep going.
Well, I was just going to also bring up doing another really successful Flex project with Alex. We played her passages last year in our small chamber setting of Flex, where it was mostly one student per instrument, really, at that point of the pandemic. And this piece we were going to record virtually and put together. And so the piece that she has, and maybe she'll talk about passages a little, but every student can choose a particular cell of music out of, I think, 14 lines to start whenever they want, as long as it's at the beginning of a phrase, or just leave out. And so I actually had all of those musicians record 2 tracks each. So we doubled our instrumentation, and they were also just kind of like playing off of themselves from their first track to their second track. I had one student come up with harmony lines to himself. So every time he played, he was playing along with himself in harmony, and he had written those harmony lines. So it was just such an awesome project. And then the visual element we added there was I had the kids go film beautiful locations around our campus as like the music video. So as you're listening to them perform, you're also seeing just all these beautiful Pacific Northwest passages, if you will, beautiful spots around our campus. And so again, just the potential of what Alex left us just blossomed into this just really beautiful music video that they put together.
It was beautiful. Because when I wrote that piece, one of the things, and Gail has heard firsthand how dark my music can be, and angst-filled.
Well, but understandably so,
Most recently, the symphony. But on the other end of the spectrum, because I wrote passages for this time and for students to be looping that track, over and over again in their earbuds, as they record at home, I purposely wrote an almost new age music kind of thing. It has a very calming, soothing thing. It has a small ramp up from the beginning to the end, but nothing dramatic. It's a very different kind of music for me. And I did that intentionally. And so seeing that music with the beautiful video that the students shot around campus and elsewhere, it was perfect. It was lovely. It was really lovely. And passages too, as you were all discussing earlier, is a piece where I designed all the separate cell lines at different playing difficulties, so that the students in this case can pick and choose. They've all got all the lines in front of them on one page, because I was thinking maybe they don't have printers, maybe they're playing off of a computer or an iPad or something. And they can just choose which lines they do and don't want to play. And I was also hoping that for the students at the earlier level playing levels, that it would inspire them to see what the other lines are, so that they'd want to get better to be able to play them. So everything's optional, even within these these monophonic instrument lines. I offered octaves just right there, so that they can just grab which octave they want to play in. And the parts are like 16 or 18 parts or something. They're like in every transposition, every clef. So no matter what. And then I encourage the band directors to give everybody the entire set. There is no score, actually. It's a couple of through composed lines for bass and drum and percussion, any kind of percussion. And then everything else is the one page of cells. So it's basically 3 pages. And I want everybody to have their choice of parts, because maybe you're at home and technically you're a trombonist, but maybe you also play tenor sax or something. You've got one lying around and you'd like to play that instrument. So it was really fun. And Caitlin's group did a lovely job.
I have a couple questions along with what has just been said. First of all, Kaitlin, there must be, as the band director or the conductor, whoever is putting this together, whether it be in your own classroom or whether it be at an honors thing, such as what you did, Alex. There must be a learning curve. I'm from a generation that you get your score and you do what you hope the composer wished for. And so there must be a learning curve for this that I would venture to guess that a lot of the ACB member people who are my age and around would probably love to know more about how to do this, because we don't want to, because we were brought up the way we were, we don't want to do anything wrong. And I understand there's nothing that's really wrong, but that's pretty much the black and white of it, I think, in some ways. At least that's the way I'm kind of getting the impression. Is that true? I mean, is there a
Right.
learning curve?
Certainly. And within my capacity at Pierce College, I teach the student flexible chamber group. And then I also teach a traditional concert band that has the students as well as dozens of adult community members. So I totally get what you're saying about the generational differences with how the approach is. For my group, because I do have quite a few students who work with me more often, with them being on the same page, they, I think, provide a level of like comfort and understanding to the group with the older members who are like, okay, well, the students, the kids are kind of getting it, and so we'll go along with it. But for me, I think the way that the process of me getting the older community members on board with some of these new projects is just a level of unbridled enthusiasm on my part of just me being so incredibly excited for the project, but then also providing a lot of what should I say? Just directions up front, resources up front. If another group has done a piece similarly, sending them recordings or videos of the project so they have an idea of like, okay, this is what we're going for. And then just literally I end every rehearsal with like, thank you for putting up with my insane ideas. You're doing great. So just checking in and making sure people understand like, yeah, this isn't the norm, but we are creating something I think really meaningful. And I can't speak for every community member, but I have had many come up and say how they've been so grateful for these opportunities to play some non-traditional music in new ways and stretching their understanding of what they can do as players, what they can do as an ensemble. And so I've gotten a lot of good feedback there. Yeah. But definitely my first quarter there was some resistance. So it takes a little bit.
Sure. But the thing that I love that I'm hearing and that I'm feeling just listening to you talk, both of you today, is the freedom. And what keeps popping into my head is a dear friend of mine who is no longer here, but she was an art teacher, and she she would just say, okay, you're really stymied about drawing this mug, but turn it upside down. And when you turn it upside down, then you're just drawing the lines. And then you turn it back up the other way, and it is what it is. And I'm feeling this artistic freedoms that those of us who did it one way, it'd be really fun to be able to do it a different way. Whether it's a flex piece or not, the freedom is what I'm enjoying. Because my first feeling is like, oh, I don't think I can do all that. There's too many rules, But with this freedom, it's really very nice. And then, Alex, the other thing with your pieces, it must be very rewarding, or I'm assuming you feel this way, that each time you hear it, it's a very different performance, which is not the same as Russian Christmas music, because that's probably going to be boom, 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 But yours must be really special in that way.
Some of those boom, boom, booms are a little more in tune than others.
This is true.
I was thinking it, but I didn't say it.
See, I'm going to say it. I'm a reverend. But yeah, no, that's one of the things I love, and frankly, that's what I love about being a composer. It's a living art. It's live performance. It's different every time. This is why some composers who write superb film music actually prefer to write new concert music. And I'll point to John Cruliano, who has said more than once, when asked, why haven't you done more films? Because he's done spectacular work with Altered States, Red Violin, Revolution. Why haven't you done more? And I believe his response is because once it's recorded, that's it. It's the same every single time. And a live performance of a symphony or whatever is different every time. And that's more compelling. So I think that there is so much to be said for live art. And it is, if you have an open heart to wanting the collaborative nature of the relationship between the conductor, the musicians, and the composer, and the audience, if you toss them into the mix, if you want that, if you enjoy that, that's what this art form really is all about to me.
Absolutely.
That's what I seek out. I'm very collaborative. Obviously. Not every composer is. Some composers are my way or the highway.
Yeah.
And that's another way. It's sort of an older way of doing it, but I know some younger people who are a little bit like that.
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to just toss in before we move on to maybe another subject, before we lose this track, is that one of the valuable things regarding community bands is not only the flex music is so necessary and needed for community bands with all kinds of variations in due to the fact they're community bands in their playing levels and in their instrumentation and their personnel. But the other thing that I love to keep saying to composers is that this is why when you think about community bands, which are largely adults, you get a few teenagers in there, but
Well,
it's
yeah.
mostly adults. This is why it's so important, I feel, when you're writing for, let's say, high school level pieces, and not to think of it as educational music, and also not to dumb the music down in any way musically, artistically,
Right.
just because you're writing for younger people for two reasons. One, I don't believe ever in treating younger people like that because they're as sophisticated in what they hear as any of us because they're hearing everything. And two, because it's that music that is very often in the hands of the adults in the community bands. And so you give the adults especially something very sophisticated and interesting and compelling to play. So I just wanted to toss that in as a side issue regarding
Right.
community because I feel so passionately about it because I love
It, it's
community bands.
it's an incredibly important point, Alex. I have a band that has grade one players ranging from the age of 8 to 80, all grade one. And some of those people that are retired, that are playing grade one music, and that's the level that they're at, they are very, very accomplished people in their lives. And they need to play mature content while it's not necessarily being difficult musically. It's so important for them. And for me, when I'm trying to research programs, when I'm trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do next September that's going to engage everyone here? Um, Music like the music that you're talking about, that has a mature content to it, that's not dumbed down, is so important. And funnily enough, the kids prefer it. Nearly always, the kids prefer the
Yeah.
good content music
So yeah,
that
a whole
has
lot better than hot cross buns or whatever.
right.
I mean, gee
And
whiz.
I've said before, we've talked about this on Repertoire Happy Hour, Gail, that I think we're living in a far better time in 2021 for beginner band music actually than we've ever lived in before. I think there's some amazing stuff, amazing people out there doing some great stuff. So thanks, Alex. I think that it's great to hear that people are thinking of those adult musicians around the world that, as you say, inevitably are going to be playing that stuff that was written for the middle school or high
That's
school.
right. When, at the same time that I was finishing up the symphony or in the middle of the symphony, I wrote my very first grade 0.5 electroacoustic piece.
Oh,
And I had a blast doing it. And as you can imagine, it's not dumbed down at all. In fact, it's called Count to 10, and it has everybody, whether you are a 12-year-old or an 80-year-old, playing up to 9/4 in a very doable way. And it's a flex piece.
wow.
And I had
Cool.
such a great time doing it. A very short piece, such a great time doing it. So I
Right.
keep saying to composers, please, please, please write for starting instrumentalists or instrumentalists at early levels in their playing achievements, because these are the same people who are going to be playing, hopefully, your later work. And you want to
Right.
get them in on the ground floor of things like playing in 5/4 or 7/4, or why
Right.
why should we wait till one? Caitlin's heard me rant about this before. Why should we wait till someone is 17 years old before they see a meter like 5 or 7?
Oh,
That's
right.
crazy. They can all count to 10, so certainly they can count to 9. Is my
Absolutely.
motto.
Yeah.
You can count to 10 by the time you're 4 years old.
That's right.
Musicians
So,
can only count to 8, Alex. Come on. You know that.
apparently.
Dancers do 8.
Yes. Right. Right. Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, I wanted to talk about an important topic for community bands. For It's the beginning of the new year. It's 2022, and Gail, one of your um, primary goals during your presidency has been around the idea of diversity, as well as growing the international reach of the ACB too. Um, Diversity has become a very big topic within educational music, of course, within high schools and within collegiate circles, where educators are meeting at conventions and having professional development and talking about important topics. But in community bands, we don't necessarily get the opportunity outside of ACB conventions, of course, Gail, but we don't have the opportunity to meet as often as the educators do. Now, luckily, many community bands, particularly in the US, have great educators as their directors or within their ranks as musicians, and are aware of the current and important topics. But elsewhere in the world, that necessarily isn't the case. I've never had a professional development opportunity ever in Ireland, for instance. And so these topics don't come to the fore. The first time that I ever heard anybody talking about the idea of having diverse composers was Jody Blackshaw, and that was in 2019 when I was at Midwest Clinic. As an Irish person, I had never had that conversation, and really, it was to my shame that I realised that the only female composer that I had had with the Irish Symphonic Wind Orchestra was Julie Giroux, and the wind orchestra had been 4 years in place at that stage. Community bands and diversity. I think it's fair to say we all know it's an important topic, but is it something, Gail? I'm going to start with you on this. Is it something that you believe that is part of the conversation with community bands as much as it should be?
I believe that it isn't as much as it should be. I'll say that right from the get go. I will say that because it is being, at least now, I live in a very conservative part of West Michigan. We have a lot of Reformed churches. We have a lot of Christian. It's very small that way. It's a good place to live. Wonderful place. That's not the issue. But when Michigan was a place where we had a lot of during World War II, a lot of people moved up from the South for jobs into the industry, and of course that's gone now. But the people still live here, so we do have some diversity. But I will say that I'm fortunate enough to have been in a school where a lot of my students now play in my band. Okay, so they've grown up and this and that, and they are starting, because they're the young ones. They're starting to bring in just the way they naturally talk. I mean, I have a daughter who's 22, and they're very comfortable with the words and what goes on in the world of diversity. I mean, you know, Kaitlin, you're the youngest one in this. Well, I shouldn't say that, Mary, Kate, but I think people are just very comfortable with it. And I can say people my age are very comfortable with it too. We just weren't for so long because we didn't know we could be. Do you see? So I think I have seen, at least in my ensembles, that more and more people are just like very comfortable now saying this is important. We need to address this with our music, with the way we talk, with who we bring into the ensembles. All of this, and we're all one, and we're all the same people, and we all love music, and really it's about the music making. So I think in the community band world, it depends a lot on where you live. I mean, that's just true about the world. But I think that it's becoming something that people are feeling that they want to open up to because of the literature, the fantastic literature. And I'll just talk about the white elephant. I think we are almost feeling like we should and have to. I think it's a place. Community is a very great place, next to churches, probably, to start talking about the morals of where we and our standards of today. And so I'm not uncomfortable talking about it on my stages and bringing in the people that are important for that. And I hope, as a leader of community bands, that is something that we can start to assimilate down into the membership. I really do believe that. I really think that as people come up and are youngers, like you, Kaitlin, coming up through, you're talking that way, it's going to be that way, much more comfortable with that generation. And that's the hope I have, as a person, that some of this will dissipate and that we will see this beautiful diversity. Because, wow, the things I have done with some of the composers and some of the artists who are more diverse than my one little area, it's been a blast. There has been no one that hasn't said this was one of the best things we ever did. So if that answers your question, Keith?
It does, absolutely, and as we're talking about 700 bands here, we're not saying that every single band in the ACB is not addressing this.
Right.
I'm sure everyone is in some capacity
Right.
aware of the issue. Kaitlin, you have been very active as an advocate for diversity, both for composers and for conductors of many different ensembles too. When we're talking about diversity, because it's a big word, what are we talking about here? We hear about diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're three words that are used for very different reasons, of course, too, because they don't mean the same thing. What are we talking about? How can you define what this topic is, and where can people start to discover the questions that they need to be asking when it comes to this huge area of community these days.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And Gail, I would just like to state like how beautifully you just phrased all that. I think that's wonderful. And it's so nice to hear, about, I think sometimes, we can think like, oh, well, people in older generations, like especially maybe in a community band setting, might be just like, well, they came to this because of an expectation of what they thought community band would be. And so starting to throw in things, about diversity and modernizing and everything like that can either feel scary or feel ostracizing or feel even like the people who are there and who have been there are doing something wrong. And so I think that, Keith, is kind of the first point, is just to understand that as we evolve our values, it's not a bad thing. And it's not something that we're trying to like punish ourselves or others about, or draw attention to things that we were doing that were maybe problematic in the past. But it's just like, let's just try something new and let's just keep going. So when I think about diversity in these realms of programming music, of working with composers or working with ensemble members and directors and things like that, is just opening the door and inviting more people in. Because if we look, community bands across the world, with the exception of community bands within mostly non-white countries, are primarily white and primarily older. And if we aren't actively working to invite in new populations, whether that is across a racial divide or across a generational divide, like these institutions will be going away because they're just not going to be serving newer generations in the way that they need. So when I think of diversity, it's less about like filling a metric and more about just like ensuring the future of our artistic endeavors. So some of the ways I think about doing that are, if you're just getting started, there are definitely underrepresented composers out there you could be programming whose music already sounds exactly like what would fit into kind of a community band program. I think about a very young American composer by the name of Joshua Idio. He's Filipino American, and he's currently doing a master's degree in composition. But his works that come out, they're just very delightful, and they're perfect for a community band program. They would fit right in, alongside a lot of the composers you would traditionally program. And so I just think about him off the top of my head. I also think about some work that we're doing with my organization, And We Were Heard, to update historical works by underrepresented composers so that they are playable by modern ensembles. And so a recent one that I did last year is a piece called On Parade. It's a quick march from a Black English female composer at the turn of the 20th century, by the name of Amanda Aldridge. And she was actually composing her band music under a male pseudonym, which was Montague Ring. So if you've ever run across music by Montague Ring, it's actually a
cool
woman.
Name.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I was like, what male pseudonym would I pick if I was going to do one? But anyways, the point is
I
that
went with Alex.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alex. Yeah, you don't have much to worry about there. But so programming her, she's got this quick step march. It's a very traditional kind of English march, but a little bit on the faster side, more like an American style march. And it's got the coolest trio section. It does like multiple key changes. It's kind of interesting. It's like not a completely traditional march, although it's from that turn of the century idiom, I think. And so by updating it just to make sure all the parts were playable and included of what we would normally see in a modern concert band, it's made that piece now accessible. So where you were going to throw another John Philip Sousa march on your program, which I love John Philip Sousa. I'm not saying never program him. I'm just saying you don't have to put him on every concert. You could replace him with Amanda Aldridge on one of your concerts and bring in some of that diversity and inclusion in a historical moment. You don't always have to go with like the most modern, advanced, avant-garde diverse composer. There's room for historical things. And that piece I made available on And We Were Heard on our website for just a $20 donation. So it's like donate to our program so we can, cover our expenses, but it's not unaffordable. And it's something that even a director could just donate $20 to us. And then I send the PDF. And because to me, I want to just get Amanda out there and also make sure that our organization doesn't fold. We need donations, but yeah. So it's not about making money. It's about just, sharing this stuff. And that's gotten quite a bit of programming. And so we're working on editing more of her works and also locating other stuff that we could edit and adapt and update.
Alex, when I came back from Midwest in 2019, I spoke to a number of colleagues here in Ireland, and I won't name any of the committees or groups involved because they're all very, very well-meaning people. But I started talking about this idea of, hey, we've only programmed this. This one female composer, or have you programmed many female composers, or and the answer that I got back is an answer that I think that we've all probably heard from time to time, which is, well, I program good music. I mean, if it's good music, it'll reach our music stands at some point. We just need more women writing good music, or variations on that.
Yeah,
Um, I'm sure this is something that we've all heard in some capacity. Can you tell me? I mean, such an obvious question, but what's wrong with that, and how can we address that? How can
yeah.
people that have been newly won over, like I was in 2019, bring bring people across the fence, get people thinking like we're thinking now?
Exactly. And what we're really dealing with is the issues of thoughtfulness and awareness raising. That if you can't know about the great music that people of color and women and people who don't look like the past band composers or other composers, you can't know about that music if it never sees the light of day. And so, of course, they're saying, "Well, I only program good music." Of course, we all know that's quite the left-handed insult. And what they're basically saying is to give them the benefit of the doubt is that they just haven't heard, they haven't taken the time to discover what the new composers are doing. Because mostly it's newer composers. I mean, we have the historic ones, as Kaitlin was so beautifully showing us an example of. But so many of the composers coming up now are living and breathing. So it's a matter of giving them tools and resources, giving everybody tools and resources through which they can discover all these terrific composers and pieces. And of course, just like with traditional music, you're not going to like everything, and that's okay. But you are going to find something that you love, but you just don't know what it is yet. So our job is to make it as easy as possible. One of the things that I've done is a few years ago, about 4 years ago, I started an offshoot page from my own website called Programming Resources, which has an exhaustive list, and it's ever growing. Every few months, I add links and articles and everything. Quite the list of resources of composers from every walk of life that you can find that you might not have found otherwise. Links to those pieces, to those composers, mostly aggregated links, and along with my thoughts on the matter. So it's a matter of making information available and normalizing the presence of composers who are not just white guys. Nothing wrong with white guys, but we need the composing world to reflect everybody. So another thing to point out is, again, most people are not discriminatory. Most people are very well intentioned. They just don't know, right? It's our job to help inform them. But one of the other things that a lot of well-intentioned people, band directors, curators, do that isn't always helpful, and it's worth pointing out here, is they won't have any people of color or women on, or hardly any, like one or two, their entire season. And then it comes time for Black Month, Black History Month, or Women's History Month, and they'll do a whole concert devoted to us. Well, that's actually not always the greatest thing. To ghettoize and segregate a group of people is the opposite of normalizing us. And so what you really want to do is instead, in my opinion, is instead of doing that, Black History Month concert with a whole bunch of wonderful Black composers, how about putting one of those people on every one of your programs throughout the year? Same thing with women, same thing with anybody. That's what we need in this world, to just normalize it. Nobody wants special treatment. We just want access and the attention that this repertoire deserves, the growing repertoire. That's all. So again, the people who do this are very well intentioned. They mean well. I'm just wanting to bring this up to the light. It's a bit of an elephant in the room sometimes. And I think it's good for a composer, and a female composer, to say this. I have benefited from many of these concerts. You can only imagine how many all-women concerts I have been programmed on. And I'm very grateful to the conductors and curators of these concerts, of course. But I just want to say that I'm not convinced it's the best way to accomplish our ultimate goal, which is to have everybody in under the tent.
And unfortunately, at that point, my Mac computer completely failed me and we lost the rest of the conversation. We did go on to talk for 20-25 minutes about this particular topic, and it was a fascinating conversation that unfortunately is lost to time. But we hope to have Alex and Kaitlin back in the future talking on the podcast. So make sure that you head over and subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts, you can head over and subscribe and make sure you don't miss future episodes. And in the meantime, you can keep up with the ACB on Facebook at Association of Concert Bands, and of course over on our website as well, acbands.org. So until next time, stay safe.